definitely a special passion project because I'm very excited about this. And this is actually combining my two favorite jobs. Interestingly enough, with the new Stack, which Alex is the publisher of and creator of, and the AgiNext community, these conferences, Agile Tour London and AgiNext and everything else. I would suggest we do cameras off besides those on the panels right now to hopefully optimize the viewing of on Zoom a panel. So that's awesome. I am really excited. I pulled together what I think is a rock star panel, but people have busy schedules, so they're going to pop in and out during it. Cornelia and Tracy are phenomenal women in tech and people in tech that just happen to be women and do a lot to help lift other people up, but also are leading, paving the way in continuous delivery and the cloud native space. And Alex is leading the discussion on that. So I'm just gonna turn over to you, Alex Williams, and thank you for everyone for joining this discussion.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us at Agile Tour London. It's great to be here. I'm Alex Williams, founder and publisher of the new Stack, and I am so excited for this discussion today. And joining us right now is Cornelia Davis. Hi, Cornelia.
Hi, Alex. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Good to see you. And Cornelia is the CTO at Weaveworks, a leading provider of GitOps, and we want to talk about GitOps today. And she's also the author of the book on Cloud Native, a software technologist. Cornelia has more than 25 years experience, and she drives technical direction for Weaveworks. I've talked with her on a few occasions over the past year or two, and always have enjoyed the discussion. She has context and a deep understanding. So we look forward to hearing your perspectives. Also joining us is Tracy Miranda. Hi, Tracy.
Hi, Alex. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here.
Yeah, great. Tracy is the executive director of the Continuous Delivery Foundation. They're a vendor-neutral nonprofit dedicated to collaboration between the industry's top developers and users and vendors to further CI/CD practices. And also joining us is James Governor. Hey, James. He's on mute, but that's okay.
It's 2020,
Hello,
I'm still on mute. But
yeah, still on mute. And James is the co-founder of Redbunk, the developer-focused research and advisory firm based in Shoreditch, London. Great to have you all here today. I wanted to start off with a question that I think is really important to discuss in the context of where we are today and the future of DevOps, and really thinking of people who are part of, who would think of themselves as BIPOC, or like Black, Indigenous people of color. And it's a really important question now. And I wanted to just get your perspectives on how you think of the future of DevOps in that context, when we have been living in a world which is, especially here in the United States, is really dominated by white men. And I don't think it's much different in other parts of the world too. So, maybe we can just start with, with Cornelia. Do you have any thoughts on the future of DevOps when you think about, it as a matter of culture, but also as a matter of culture that really represents the current state of the world?
Boy, start out with a doozy there, Alex. So DevOps is a way of, creating social justice. I am not sure. That might be a little bit of a stretch. Certainly, part of what we do with DevOps is try to break down barriers. So I can see why you are drawing some parallels there, because the problems that we have with social justice in the world are about actually intentionally formed barriers between groups of folks. And so now I will often say that computer science is easy compared to, everything else in the world. So I often say I'm so glad I'm a mathematician and I'm not a politician or a lawyer or something like that. So I am going to I'm going to say I don't know.
Yeah. If I can jump in.
Yeah.
And so I think like from a community perspective, it's super important. And like at the Continuous Delivery Foundation, it's something we talk a lot about at the moment. And it seems to have been a sea change this year. So we previously talked a lot about, diversity and inclusion and how do we be more inclusive. And then I think at some point this year, it sort of ramped up to, okay, like, let's get serious. How do we think about being an anti-racist foundation, just lean right into it. And we see that like in projects like Jenkins, they suddenly got together and said, okay, we're ditching the term master. We're going to replace that with controller. This is like a 15-year-old project which has had that terminology forever. But everybody's agreed that, if it's a small step in the right direction to make people feel more welcome, and it's just the beginning about how we have to be thinking. I think there's a lot to be done, but there's certainly a lot of momentum now, and the leadership sees that, so that's good.
I think, I've noticed, Tracy, the progress in and around the Cloud-Bees community, and also, in your work. So, well done. That's important. Alex, it's a good question. It's been a hell of a year. Much that we've had the pandemic to deal with. We've had some of it, I would say, a sea change in attitudes. Certainly around the Black Lives Matter movement. I think that's been something hopefully positive that's come out of the year is a change in sentiment. But yeah, you ask a question like that, and certainly for me, when we think about who are some of the people that are coming along from a pipeline perspective, Nigeria is a fantastic source of talent. Black talent, and obviously they've got a political situation going on there that's super scary. So that's all the scary stuff. I mean, I think all we can do as an industry is try and do better and be more welcoming and make sure that our communities are inclusive. And I think DevOps Days as an event series. And certainly, if we think of the founders, the people that sort of first began to talk about DevOps in Andrew Clay Schaefer and Patrick Dubois, both of them are deeply, deeply invested in building inclusive communities. And if I look at events that have done a tremendous job over the years in changing the way that we think about how we run events to be more inclusive, both from a speaker and a delegate perspective. So you've got you can't be what you can't see, but you also don't necessarily want to be in an environment where you're the only Black person in a room, say. They've done a phenomenal job, and that's not orthogonal to DevOps as a phenomenon. The people that named it and have done the most to build this community, I think, have been cognizant, and to my mind at least, have moved the industry forward. So one hopes that we can continue that work because, communities are not welcoming enough, and we can all do a lot better.
I think that we've got actually a specific problem in this group, in that there's a structural difficulty with us being able to be inclusive. Of course, it's what all of us want and what we should be striving for. But the Western model, the Western kind of model of organizational cultures says that small autonomous teams, generative cultures, are the kinds of cultures that are most effective at practicing techniques like continuous delivery and DevOps. And the problem, one of the downsides of those kinds of cultures, which are the kinds of cultures that I spent most of my career working in, is that you tend to be less bureaucratic and therefore more prone to suffer the consequences of human bad choices. So it's very easy for those small autonomous teams to just fall into the trap of hiring people who look like me or behave like me. And so in a more bureaucratic culture, it's easier to establish things like hiring policies that say that, we're going to try and, be gender neutral or neutral about people's ethnic backgrounds and those sorts of things. And so I think this is a particular challenge for the kinds of teams that technically we need to build in order to get to the efficient engineering practices that we describe. So I think that this is a serious problem, and I think that it's really incumbent on those of us that are parts of those teams to do what we can. As you can see, I'm an old white dude, and so I'm on the wrong side of the argument to really understand this. But I think being cognizant of the things that are challenging to us and our ability to be more inclusive, the human foibles that we're all, naturally likely to be victim to, is part of the problem. And we've got to be doing a better job. We've got to be looking to be more diverse. We are more effective when we are. Clearly, we are. But there are bad habits that the kinds of teams that we need from a technical point of view. It's hard to enforce the rules on those sorts of teams. It's a big problem specifically for DevOps style teams, to my mind.
Well, we have some comments from people from Pradip Khatri, who says that even in central government departments in the United Kingdom, we're replacing the terms master slave. Mm-hmm. We have another comment from Natasha Simone, who says, as a Black woman, a lot of doors are being opened for me because of George Floyd. So it's a brilliant question. Representation is so important from here on. The question that I think of when I was just writing this up was, what is the part of the DevOps roots that need to adapt? What is it in the DevOps culture and the originations of DevOps that needs to adapt? Do you have any thoughts on that, Tracy?
Well, I think at its heart, DevOps has always been about breaking down silos, and we traditionally think about it as strictly the devs and the ops. But I think you can easily take that and run with it and say, okay, how can we break down all types of silos, not just across different roles, but how do we build, teams that are truly inclusive and appreciate the benefits you get from that?
Well, I think to Tracy's point and Dave's, there was an interesting comment that was made, probably one of these slightly self-congratulatory VC types. Well, maybe I'm being unfair to them actually, but there was a comment this week that being underestimated is a gift because it means that you don't have any problems getting motivated. And I felt that this just smacked a privilege to me. I think that we are underestimating people every day, and it's debilitating for them. We lose a lot of people in the industry broadly. DevOps would just be, an area where that would be true. If we're constantly underestimating the contributions of women, Black people, people of color, indigenous peoples, if we're constantly underestimating their capability to contribute to our communities, to our projects, and to our success, as Dave said, we'll have worse outcomes, but it's debilitating. And I think that we do need to, give the benefit of the doubt to a broader range of folks, rather than just assuming, as unfortunately, and I think Dave was talking about this, the implicit biases, oh, this person looks like me, so we can work together effectively in a team, is not good. And so, yeah, I think that if we can, it's time to stop underestimating the talent that's out there, because it is legion. There is a pipeline, and if we support a broader range of folks, they're going to do good work. I think it's sort of as simple as that. And so that's true for DevOps, but that's true of everywhere in IT, it's time to stop underestimating Black people and stop underestimating women and people of color and those that can make a contribution, because we need them in the industry. We need more tech people. We've got a skills shortage. So yeah, I think it's a good question, Alex.
Yeah, the thing that I want to draw our attention to, if it's not already obvious, but it was, I think, Dave, that your point was really well taken, is that it's a matter of scale. And what I mean by that is, I know Andrew Clay Schaefer very well, and I've been part of the DevOps days, and I agree that when you go to a DevOps days, the community feels great. It feels very inclusive, but that is a small scale part of our broader community. And so when you go into larger organizations, then where does that culture come along with it? Now, I do think, Dave, that your point about bureaucracy is really interesting, because we often think of bureaucracy as a negative thing. My husband happens to work for Raytheon, and they have much better figures in terms of gender diversity than most startups do. And in fact, somebody just cited a statistic to me recently and said, oh, well, in startups, the average is 5% women. So therefore, it's okay for startups. Startups shouldn't have to, aim for 25, because they're staying within their peer group. And that's the trap that we fall into, is we say, okay, well, when we're at small scale, and that's the point that you made about 2 pizza teams, we're at small scale. So we have to have the talent that we need, and broader scale can maybe absorb, perceived, to your point, James, perceived differences and abilities. And so I think we have to be very cognizant of this point of scale.
I think that's important. It's the kind of lazy thinking that we're all prone to at some level, of just assuming that because I'm a startup and all of these people are young white dudes that are living in Silicon Valley, then that's what you need to be a startup. It's ridiculous, but it's a self-fulfilling bias. I remember one of my hobbies is flying. I'm a pilot, and I remember reading a little while somebody senior in the Royal Air Force saying that women, the Royal Air Force was open to recruiting women, men, anybody. But enough women didn't pass the selection criteria. Well, that means the selection criteria are wrong. It's stupid. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy that you're going to get fewer candidates from these more diverse backgrounds. And I think it's a big problem, and it's a big problem particularly for these smaller teams that DevOps promotes. And I've been to a couple of DevOps Days events, and yeah, they're nice places, but they're not terribly diverse. They're much like other software conferences. There aren't enough women there. There aren't enough people of color there, that sort of thing. If you go to an event in China, the stuff's different there. Certainly in terms of gender diversity, there are many more women that are involved in technical activities there as a profession. We've turned off women. We've turned off women of color in our profession, and there's an inbuilt bias, which is a serious cultural problem. But I'm not quite sure DevOps can fix it alone. But we should be doing whatever we can to try and fix it, for sure.
Yeah.
One of the issues that we see a lot, for instance, in the Kubernetes community is the awful developer experience, and how poor it is. And I'm wondering, does this reflect on what we're talking about? Is, if you look back at the history of software, it's been pretty much built by men. And and when you start looking at products that are actually designed in part, or from the start by women, they're much different. And I'm sure people of varying cultural backgrounds or racial backgrounds would have a, perspective on it that would be different than white men. So I'm just wondering if that has a play in the whole DevOps story here, where the developer experience is tantamount. And James, the Redmond Group is well known for talking about the developer experience and such.
Yeah. Okay. Then I will jump in. I'm trying to not do that all the time. Given that there are other great voices here. But look, so I think it's really good question. And yes, it's true. Kubernetes does have plenty of sharp edges. And there are other things that people can learn that are easier, but give the project and its founders and the ecosystem around it their due. One of the things that I've seen the Kubernetes community do quite well, so there are a few things. Look at the keynotes at KubeCon, year in and year out, and they've done actually an excellent job of representation. I know that if I tune into a KubeCon keynote, I am going to see speakers that I didn't know before that are hugely impressive and that come from underrepresented backgrounds. They just do a good job of that. But I think it's intentional. If we look at their process for bringing in contributors and then evolving, basically bringing them on to become maintainers, that is intentional, and they do a pretty good job. And again, I mean, good is all things considered. But they've intentionally built into the structure doing a better job of representation. I think the Kubernetes community has done that quite well. Another community we could point to would be like Go. I mean, Go, systems programmers and quite complicated. But that's a community that realized that it needed to do better and has really spent a lot of effort in bringing on folks from a broader range of backgrounds, because I don't think what we should say is it's a difficult experience, therefore they couldn't do it. Maybe it's a difficult experience and we can create a better environment in which they can engage with it and become part of the community. So yeah, I think just because things are hard doesn't necessarily mean that they are not relevant for everyone, but obviously good and convenient developer experiences are something to aspire to.
Tracy, any thoughts on the Continuous Delivery Foundation and what you're doing there to help change the developer experience to some extent?
Yeah, so, well, just on the kind of diversity side, I say it's interesting, like for continuous delivery, we're looking a lot at what CNCF have done and on the diversity front, and I agree with James, they have done a really good job. We're pretty privileged at CDF. It seems to be like pretty much run by women. Myself as the exec director, we've got, the head of all the different committees. You take someone like Christy Wilson, who's leading the Tecton project. So almost at every level, leadership, technical, we've got some amazing women. So I don't want to get into kind of oversimplifying that, women do better developer experience. And I think it propagates some myths that, maybe men are better at kind of deep technical stuff. But I think in general, I agree with the sentiment that the more different views you have, the better the software is and the more we can focus on that experience. And some of the things we're hearing in our community by just having all those different people is the need to include different kinds of roles. Like I heard in one of our interoperability groups, someone said from their teams, they pride themselves on their support. And then the support folks were saying, okay, I Googled how to do support for continuous delivery, but everything's written by engineers. But we need to know, like, all these features are being kind of flicked on with a switch. And if we pride ourselves on being able to support folks, we need to know when things are going out and what that customer experience is going to be like. So I think, yeah, we're thinking through experience at all levels, from developer experience to customer experience to how you tie the whole flow together and just get everybody involved.
Yeah, I mean,
Excellent.
One of the things that I would chime in on that is that Kubernetes is complex. And, I'll say personally, that's one of the things I love about it. I mean, I love complex systems. And so That's a cool thing. But I do think of Kubernetes, the kind of the core, as presenting a bunch of axioms, if you will. So forgive me here for getting, kind of very techie and propeller heady here. But Kubernetes represents a bunch of axioms, and these are the things that can be composed to create the theorems. And theorems are generally higher level, and they allow us to understand broader concepts. And I think that that's something that Kubernetes has done really well. And kind of turning from, just the topic of social justice, sorry, not just, but very important topic of social justice, to kind of more on the technology side. I think that is what we can do. That's, I think, one of the ways that we're starting to see DevOps continue to evolve in this now Kubernetes era, is that we have a new set of primitives, we have a new set of axioms, and we're generating a new set of theorems based on those components that we have. And so there's these new patterns in Kubernetes around constant reconciliation that didn't exist in the early days of DevOps. And now, how do we retool these DevOps approaches? And reconciliation, by the way, I think is so important to DevOps, because DevOps, the way that we bring Dev and Ops together and break down the barriers is through feedback loops. So now we actually have a technology pattern, which is about feedback loops, that is a natural fit to the feedback loops that we need for DevOps in general. And continuous delivery is one of those feedback loops, but what we do is we chain them all together. So.
We have a question. We have a question about what does the panel think about more quotas? I think it's encouraging people who come from oppressed low-income backgrounds that self-confidence and self-esteem can be helped by this. Quotas like having requirements for numbers of women or underrepresented folks. You just asked that question, Tracy. And then on the back of that question, is it enough for companies to just reach quotas and diversity targets for the working environment? Is not inviting or nurturing, if their working environment is not inviting or nurturing to underrepresented people.
Okay,
Go ahead.
I am going to jump in here. So I'm not necessarily a fan of quotas, but I am a fan of kind of legislated, or some kind of imposed process that forces us to break down biases. And the reason I want to jump in is because one of my favorite stories around this is, particularly, this is Agile London, so this may be news for a lot of folks. But here in the United States, I think it was back in the 1970s or 1980s, I don't remember exactly when, there was new legislation that was put in place called Title IX. And Title IX, what it did was it required that universities, and in the United States, sports programs in the university are huge. It required that universities provide as much opportunity for female athletes as male athletes. Now, you might imagine this was extraordinarily unpopular in many, many communities in the United States. And it was blamed for football programs going away at universities. And it was blamed, frankly, in retrospect, with the elimination of certain privilege that men had at the university level. But in retrospect now, several decades later, I personally give credit to Title IX for a significant shift in the way that women are viewed, not just in sports, because at the surface level, when they instilled Title IX, sure, it gave access to more women who were able to be college athletes, but the reach has extended far, far beyond that. And so whenever I see, for example, a Nike commercial where women are featured prominently, women who are powerful in a sports setting. And I think about the young women who are watching these commercials and seeing themselves in that and saying, I can be powerful. I trace that all the way back to Title IX. I think without Title IX, a lot of that doesn't happen. And so whether it's quotas or it is some other forcing function, I'm a huge fan of forcing functions.
I was typing a response to the question about quotas when you pulled it up. So I think I don't see how you're able to achieve equal opportunities for groups of people that have been discriminated against without redressing that inequality of opportunity. I saw a nice cartoon a few months ago that just kind of stuck in my head, and you had a tall person and a short person standing behind a fence watching a football game, and the tall person could see over the fence and the short person couldn't. That's equality. So then you have you lower the fence and both people can see over the fence, and that's equal opportunity. We need to give people equal opportunity. That's what matters. And in order to do that, we can't just rely on people being nice, because otherwise we end up with startups hiring young white dudes again, because it's the easy choice. So we've got to make it, there's got to be some form of help given to people that are being discriminated against. So it seems to me that you've got to use ideas like quotas or some way of making it fairer for people to have access to what's available to them. I don't. You said, Alex, at the start that you know, most software has been developed by men. There's been profound contributions delivered to our profession by women. Margaret Hamilton invented the term software engineer while she was doing the control systems for the Apollo program. All sorts of great, offerings. Not enough, because we've been discriminating against those group of peoples. In the early days, it was equal nearly in terms of the people, women and men, that were doing software in the very early days. And then we screwed something up very badly that discriminated against women. And so we've got to find a way of providing that equality of opportunity, the equal access to the entry to be able to do some of these things, I think.
Yeah, and not telling the stories of the successes of women is part of the discrimination.
Yes.
I heard Walter Isaacson say once very clearly, women have been written out of the history of computer science.
Yeah.
We're there, we just have been written out of the history.
Yeah.
I'm waiting. No, I'll continue. Then if you think about it, then in terms of what we're talking about, when you think about Agile, which is a big conference topic here, I wonder about Agile's role in this. Is this a similar parallel discussion? Are there differences? Agile and DevOps are very much related. Is there any corollary that we can look at?
So I can.
There are some other questions.
I think, Agile, DevOps, continuous delivery, these are not going to solve the problems we're talking about. So we have to, as communities, tackle those. But I think, in general, those three terms, anyway, they tend to be used in a kind of overlapping way. For me, Agile is, focusing on processes. DevOps has this focus on culture, and CI/CD or continuous delivery is focused on tools and automation. So each of them are kind of tackling a part of the puzzle from a different kind of focus point. But that's kind of independent of the discussions around improving our communities, which, those processes aren't going to do that. We have to do that.
Go ahead, Dave.
Sorry, I have to pick up on that because I disagree with Tracy on her definitions. So I just on terminology. So I think that we miss a huge value, and I'm saying this to you because you're part of the Continuous Delivery Foundation. Yeah. I think we miss a huge part of the value of continuous delivery and what it means and how it's useful as a tool when we underplay it as saying it's about tools and technologies. I think it's missing the point entirely. the phrase continuous delivery, which I think I played a part in popularizing, came from the Agile Manifesto, which said our highest priority is the continuous delivery of valuable software. If you want to achieve that, then that takes certainly technology, technical excellence, but also organizational excellence and cultural excellence. You've got to do all of those things. And I'm not a big fan of the DevOps term. I think DevOps, the ideas are profoundly important. I completely believe they're fantastic tools. But for me, they're part of our ability to continuously deliver ideas into the hands of users. And so sorry, I just wanted to.
I want to respond to that. So I think, yeah, so my point I'm trying to make is that when people talk about these terms, and specifically thinking from people coming in new, there's an implicit focus depending on what you're talking about. And in the same way, like continuous delivery, tools are not going to do it alone. But I think it's important to emphasize when people start saying CI/CD or continuous delivery, there's a lot of focus on automating the practices. And I think, automating the practices as a way to drive culture change is key. And you can't do it alone. But in my experience, when you have this DevOps umbrella, there's this bias for culture. When you're talking continuous delivery, there's a bias for tool. And that's certainly from the continuous delivery standpoint, we're starting from that point of, okay, how do you figure out this automation so then it can drive the culture, because great tools drive culture change. And then you can connect it in and you can not worry about those things. So you can focus then on helping your team figure out the rest of the processes. So I think we're not disagreeing, but I'm just emphasizing what I see the focus. If that makes sense.
We have another question from the community, and it's about the potential of no code environments for being more inclusive, and that's an interesting point there. Anyone have any perspective on that?
I can jump in, and I think that helps. I don't think we're there yet. So we had a chap called Dave Sodia from a company called Go Spot Check, and he was talking about their requirements for their team. So they have 2.5 folks who are focused on ops. So they tend to buy a lot and rather than build. And one of his requirements was that they had to have a lot of push button support and a lot of user interfaces, because they had a lot of people involved in the delivery of software who, were not just needed the buttons, weren't going to be making commits to Git, but just had to be treated as kind of first-class citizens. So, while I think I'd love to see more from kind of no-code environments and better integration, it feels like we're just at the starting point of that. So the tooling is not quite there yet.
I confess that I'm not a great believer from a technical point of view in no code as a goal. I've been writing software professionally for nearly 40 years, and throughout that period there have been attempts to try and implement what these days we would call no code development tools, and they nearly always have a little burst of popularity and then they fall by the wayside. My prediction is that this is going to do the same. I think that there's something profound and fundamental about software and the way that we use it to solve problems. If you go back to the Hollerith machine at the start of the 20th century, you can write down the algorithm for the Hollerith machine in SQL, and it's understandable, and it's the same kind of granularity of problem solving involved in specifying that problem as we would recognize as a programmer today. Writing code is there's things that we do there's something really, really profound and fundamental about the level of granularity that we can't avoid. And yes, in narrow circumstances, we can go beyond that. We can raise the level of abstraction, but we haven't significantly raised the level of abstraction with which we solve problems for a very long time. You could argue that machine learning is doing that in one way, in one different way, and that's certainly going to continue to have a significant impact. But in terms of human created artifacts, I think that's something else entirely. And in terms of the whether that's a tool for gender or inclusivity, I think that's kind of assuming that different human beings think about and solve problems differently, and I don't believe that. I believe that we're more similar than we are different, and that the range of abilities in women or people of color is precisely the same as the range of abilities in men or young white dudes in startups. I don't see any difference there, so I don't think any of those sorts of things are going to prefer one group or another.
Let's finish out and talking a little bit about your last topic there, because I think it has an important role in society. And when you talk about machine learning, especially AI, and what we're seeing from the likes of algorithms and how they're emerging. But first, I want to just share Charlene Grant and what she has to say. She says, "I'm grateful to Black Coder Bootcamp, which is for Black women, for allowing me to see successful people that represent me, to know it is possible to achieve my goals. Great talk. Thankful to be here." Thank you very much, Charlene. And this issue, though, on this last issue of automation is a critical one, I think, in this discussion, where we see algorithms being used, for instance, by Facebook. And there's a New Yorker article on content moderation, and just the degree of hate-filled speech that we're seeing on the significant social networks out there. So, but it's a form of automation, really, that they're using, and it's a form of using algorithms for business purposes. And I'm curious on what are the learning lessons for you, for the DevOps community, for the future of DevOps, when you reflect and when you see out there in society and kind of thinking about from here going forward. And I'd love to just start with Cornelia, who I know has a deep history in understanding automation, and is now working very closely on practices such as GitOps. So Cornelia, any last thoughts before we go?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to draw it back to some of the other themes that have come up in the conversation here is that the automation that is required, and automation, whether it's AI supported or not, the automation are certainly the set of tools that can help start to bridge a whole series of gaps. But I want to go all the way back to something that Dave said when he quoted the Agile Manifesto that talked about continuous delivery of value. And one of the things that I think that we're guilty of in the DevOps community, and I don't charge us heavily with this, because we don't want to start by boiling the ocean. We need to start with something small. But is that I think in the DevOps community, we've continued to stay pretty isolated, even in the automation, in the areas that we focus on those algorithms and focus on the automation. So for example, we have a lot of tools that help us with continuous testing. But what does that do for everything from the ideation to the delivery and the feedback loops coming back? And so one of the things that I'm most encouraged by these days, again, to go back to kind of the propeller head thing, is this notion of when we start to think about loops and feedback loops as a core tenet of everything, then we can start to link together a bunch of feedback loops. So what we do is we can say, well, I automate this feedback loop and I automate this feedback loop, but what we have to do is we have to be able to link those together. And then perhaps AI comes in and allows us to look at this network of linked together feedback loops and glean some broader insight from that.
I'd like to finish with Tracy, but for quickly, go to James and Dave. But James, any thoughts?
I always have thoughts. We feed the beast. And we need to be intentional. I mean, algorithms, are great, but they can come at a cost. And it's just too easy. Whether it's machine learning for fixing systems problems, or machine learning in social networks. I mean, look at what we're feeding Look at what we're feeding the algorithms. Look at what we're feeding the beast. I mean, you know, I look at the role of the media. I look at the role of people like Boris Johnson and Donald Trump. You know, I look at the behaviors we reward, and, you know, that's going to lead computers to get a pretty weird idea about what is good and acceptable and normal behavior. And sometimes it's intentional. So, you know, Facebook decided that the news was being favored too much, so they should give more credit to the Daily Caller and others. And, you know, let's make Ben Shapiro get all of the attention. So that's them intentionally tweaking the algorithm to further feed the beast and drive further outrage. You know, I think we need a bit less outrage. We need to be a bit, you know, it was interesting yesterday. I saw a presentation from Google's AI folks, and they're just very cognizant of how bad things can be. You know, the recent one, this year's example was, you know, machine learning algorithms looking at someone with a thermometer gun, and, you know, thinking if it was a black person holding it, that it was a real gun, that sort of thing. And so they know they have a problem. That is a problem that we, as a cult, to Dave's point, DevOps doesn't solve that. Machine learning doesn't solve that. The culture needs to work on that. And from that perspective, I just think that if we're going to look at algorithms and algorithms of oppression, you know, go to Safia Noble, follow her right now on Twitter, and follow everyone else that she's talking to, and you'll get a better sense of, you know, people that are really thinking through and have been pushing the state of the art forward in thinking about algorithms that will not do harm. But I don't really know that's the question you asked, but certainly social, we've got a pretty big problem. And one
I was thinking about DevOps and automation principles there, and I think what you're saying here is that, you know, you can't just look at. You're looking at kind of the factor that there are that we're feeding.
Okay, I'll give a different answer then. Simply, I don't believe it. In the same way that Dave has some sort of skepticisms about, I mean, look, low code has a role to play, and it will be a thing. I have many agreements with Dave about that. We won't go into that now. But what I will say, if somebody comes to you and says, we have software that is going to do DevOps for you, then that is bullshit.
Okay.
You know, there is no machine learning on the planet that will do that for you. I mean, there is a particular vendor that has received tens of millions of VC funding because they have machine learning for continuous delivery pipelines. And let me tell you, people build pipelines and will
maybe we should talk about people who,
and humans do have a role to play. So that's my question.
Dave, any last thoughts?
No, on the broader societal principles, I've been involved in software engineering for a long time, and I was optimistic. I thought that this would improve the world, and we have what I dreamed about. So in the 1980s, I had imaginations of things like the internet and being able to access the whole of human knowledge at my fingertips. That was a science fiction dream. We have that, and now there's some of that stuff that I wish that we didn't have. So we are in the middle of the greatest social experiment in the history of our species, and we're not going to fix it with engineering practices around software development. We should all be thoughtful and careful, and I agree with what James is saying about, you know, let's try and be nice to one another and worry about those sorts of things. But there's going to be some unpleasant people that are going to manipulate this information for political purposes, and we've seen that, and it's a big problem. And I wish I was more confident that we were going to be able to solve it, but I don't think that.
The ocean that I'm trying to boil is how do we improve software engineering, and I am thoughtful, I hope, about other more social aspects. I'm a social being, but But these bigger issues, I'm feeling pretty helpless about some of those, to be honest, at the moment. I've just been moaning the politics in my country for sure, and
Tracy,
hoping that we find a better way of doing things.
Tracy, thank you, Dave. Tracy, take it out.
Yeah. Okay. So I think, technology and automation have always amplified the best and the worst of human nature, and we're seeing a lot of the worst be amplified. So people can always say, humans kill people, but then guns came along and made it faster. We're seeing the same thing. Just some of the worst elements are being amplified, especially with automation. With what Cornelia was saying about feedback loops being important, I think we need some better ethics and morals in that feedback loops we have today. And I think for me, the way we tackle this is always about being organized and being organized as communities. And I think like open source and the principles around it in terms of transparency, collaboration, bringing people together to say, it's not going to work if the other side is just that better organized. We have to get the good folks together, centered on principles, and just very organized about how we're going to approach this and tackle it and get everybody moving that way. And I think that's what we can hope to do.
Hire more Black, Indigenous people of color. I think that's probably
include
how
everybody.
That's what I would say. Just to finish this out, thank you so much for everyone for taking the time to participate. For all of you who listened and watched our discussion, Tracy Miranda, Cornelia Davis, James Governor, Dave Farley. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you, Alex. And
Thank you, Jennifer.
just everything, I just have to plug on Friday, Emily Weber and Sam Brown are leading a consequence scanning workshop. If y'all haven't been to a consequence scanning workshop, I would recommend joining, because I think it should be a part of every developer experience, is thinking through the consequences of the tech we're building. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm gonna try, I don't know.